Now let's talk about the crops for Europe. So, the sole purpose of cultivation of crops in India was so that the East India Company could export the crops and take the Indian crops to Europe and sell it at much higher prices to yield benefits and profits. So, the British East India Company and the Britishers, they realized that the Indian countryside, the villages, the farms, they are not only good and beneficial for them to earn revenue, but it could also be used to grow the crops that have very high demand in the European markets. So, what were those crops? By the late 18th century, by the late 18th century, the company, they forced or they encouraged the cultivators to grow specific crops such as indigo and opium. So, these were the two main crops that were started and encouraged to be grown in the Indian subcontinent by the cultivators. Now, what was the reason behind that? These crops, they had a very high demand in the European market, and the British East India Company could sell these crops at a very high price in European markets to yield profits. Apart from these crops, there were other crops as well which were grown throughout the Indian subcontinent, and let's have a look at these. So, the British forced the cultivators in various different parts of the country to grow specific crops. For example, so jute in Bengal. Jute is also known as a golden cloth. So, why is that? So, because jute was sold at a very high price. So, jute in Bengal, tea in Assam. Again, the English, they love their tea. So, tea was at a very high demand in European markets. So, tea was encouraged and the cultivation of tea was encouraged. But in which region? In Assam region. Then, apart from that, it was sugarcane in United Provinces, which is now Uttar Pradesh. Then, apart from that, there was wheat in Punjab, cotton from Maharashtra, Punjab, and rice in Madras. So, these were different crops which were grown in different parts of the country, and then they were exported from Indian markets to the European markets. Now, apart from this, the Britishers, they used various methods to expand the cultivation of the crops that they needed, that were beneficial and profitable for them. Does color have a history as well? As we see today that there was cotton cloth and textiles. In textile industry, there are specific colors, prints, etc. Now, where does these colors come from? It was not like the chemicals were made, it was not like that in the early times they had chemicals to make these paints and colors. Just like today we have all the chemicals and materials available. So, how was this colored? How was it formed at that time? What is the history behind this? Let's have a look. So, this figure, this image, it represents a 20th century kalamkari print. This print still exists. I am sure you must have seen these kind of prints on shirts, kurta, saris, etc. This is a kalamkari print which was made by weavers of Andhra Pradesh. Moving forward, as you see here in this picture, it is designed by William Morris. So, this cotton print, it was designed by a designer and artist, William Morris, in Britain in the 19th century. The one thing common in these is the use of rich blue color. As in this picture, you can see that there are specific intricate designs made from rich blue color, and in the previous image also, there was a utilization of blue color, isn't it? Now, this blue color and the raw material from which we used to derive this blue material, this blue pigment, was known as indigo. This color and this shade and the raw material used to make this is known as the indigo. So, how was this blue indigo color made? As you know that there were no chemicals in early times, so colors could not be formulated by use of chemicals. This substance, these colors, these pigments have to be obtained from natural things such as flowers, trees, leaves, etc. Isn't it? So, indigo is also one such pigment, one such color which was used very popularly for making and printing. So, this color was derived from a plant which is called as indigo. The blue color used in picture was produced by a plant called indigo as well. This is a picture of the indigo plant. Do you see how beautiful the plants are? So, these flowers, they are then mushed together to form this blue pigment. Now, let's find out why was there such a high demand for Indian indigo. it was not just Indian cultivators or Indian weavers who were using indigo. There was a very high demand for Indian indigo in foreign markets as well. So, countries like France, they used to cultivate this indigo in Saint-Dominique. So, there is a province called as Saint-Dominique and there indigo was cultivated. But what about other countries? So, in Caribbean islands, in Brazil, by Portuguese people, in Jamaica, and by the English, and also in Venezuela by the Spanish people. So indigo was spread across the globe, across different continents by different kind of nationalities. For example, so the French people, they started to cultivate indigo in Saint Dominique, in the Caribbean islands as well. So in Brazil, it was spread by Portuguese. So apart from that, in Jamaica, it was the Englishmen, it was the Britishers who spread the use of indigo. At the same time, so in Venezuela, it was the Spanish people who were cultivating in North America. All these countries of North American, South American continents, they had or they used the Indian indigo in some or the other form. So what was the alternative for this indigo for European cloth? Indigo was very expensive. The Indian indigo which was produced in India, it was very expensive, and at the same time it was not easy to transport from Indian subcontinent to different parts of the world. It would sometimes take days and months to transport a small amount of indigo to other countries. So it was not cheap. The transportation was not cheap. The displacement or the movement of indigo was not cheap. So at the same time, the prices, the selling price rose and became higher. Not everybody could afford it. So what was the alternative or option that could be used in place of this indigo? So a lot of countries, specifically in the European cloth making industry, they started using a different kind of pigment. So let's find out what that pigment was. As you can see here, that only a small amount of indigo, it used to reach Europe. So the European cloth producers, the European cloth industry, they started to use a substance called as woad, as you see here. So woad, just like indigo, had been used to create violet or blue dyes. So this was the major source for European markets to be used and European producers to be used because it was easily available. So why did the Europeans chose woad as an alternative? Because it was easily available for them, okay, as it was a plant of the temperate region. I am sure you must have studied in geography as well that what are temperate regions, temperate zone. So since it was easily available in that area, it was easy to make dyes from that. Woad was cultivated in different parts of Europe such as Italy, France, Spain, southern parts of Germany, some parts of Britain as well. So all these countries, they have been listed down here. Cloth manufacturers in Italy, France and Britain, they used to use indigo to dye their cloth. Again, despite the fact that there was an alternative available, Indian indigo was a substance of quality. The pigment, the blue color which was made from indigo, it was very rich and sober to the eyes. So despite everything, Italy, France and Britain, they used to use indigo to dye their cloths. Only a small amount of Indian indigo, it used to reach European markets by the 20th century as its price became very high. There was high inflation rate, so the prices rose. Why was there such a good demand for Indian indigo? Let's find out. As we have seen that a lot of dyers, they used to use indigo to dye their cloth. There was a very high demand for Indian indigo in not just in European markets but all around the world. Because of this such a high competition by the Indian indigo, the woad producers in the European markets, they started to protest. So woad producers, they pressurized their government to ban the import of indigo. As we have learnt in other chapters as well that the European cloth producers, they started to protest against the textiles that were imported from India. Similar to dye, similar to the Indian indigo, the woad producers of Europe, they started to pressurize the government, sign petitions, etc. in order to ban the import and utilization of Indian indigo. The demand for Indian indigo grew further because the Britishers, they began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded thoroughly. So Despite all the efforts, despite all the challenges, the demand for indigo, Indian indigo, which is cultivated in India, it rose. It was all times high. Why was that so? Because the Britishers, they started to industrialize their cotton production. So big industries and machinery was set up so that a large amount of cloth could be manufactured, could be produced on very large scale. So industries were set up for that. So therefore the demand for blue pigmentation, it rose. So, supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed for various reasons. So there were other raw material which was available in West Indies and America, but there were failures in meeting that production demand as well. Let's see what were the reasons. So between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world came down to half. Now the production of indigo between this period, it was left to half. Okay, for example, at the earlier time, if we were producing 7 kg of indigo, now within this period, the demand only was decreased by 50%, leaving it just to 50 kgs. Okay, why was that so? There were many challenges in that field. Repeat. Why was that so? There were many problems and challenges associated with this downfall. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately looked for new sources of indigo supply, since there was a very steep decrease in the production of indigo. The Britishers, they started to find new places where they could get indigo from. It was India from which Britain can demand supply of indigo withoot any difficulty. Now it was only India, since supplies were not available from West Indies and America. They had to find some kind of other place where they could get indigo from. So the Britishers, they commercialized the Indian market in terms of growing indigo, and only India could serve to provide such raw material.